The rule of thirds, golden ratio and symmetry are all important factors for composing a photo, but if we only work within these parameters, it can really stifle our creativity. So in today's video, I'm talking about letting go of preconceived ideas and how stepping away from the rules can invite authenticity into our compositions. One of the most common questions I'm asked in emails and on my workshops is how I go about composing a scene. Do I use the rule of thirds, or do I have a predetermined workflow that I go through? So in today's video, I'm going to run through some photos that I've shot in the past and discuss why I made the decisions that I did, which I hope will answer that question. And then later in the video, we'll come back here to hopefully put some of those practices into place up on top of this amazing hill. This is probably one of the best viewpoints in Pembrokeshire, and the heather is in full bloom too, so I'm really hopeful we can make an image or two this evening. Fingers crossed. Absolutely stunning up here, absolutely stunning. One thing I should mention is that photography composition is obviously totally subjective. So what one person enjoys, another will absolutely hate. You know, there's so many different variables, isn't there, from the subject matter to the colours in the scene, how it's composed. So just bear that in mind when I go through these images. What I like, others might not, and that is 100% absolutely fine. You know, how boring would it be if we all like the same thing? So when I'm looking for compositions, the first thing in my mind is looking for a subject. Now this could be anything that catches my eye really. So I'm not necessarily looking for a photo, I'm looking for an object of interest. I find most of my favourite images of at least one clear defined subject, and I guess this is a result of working in this way. Once I've found a clear subject, I then work on relationships, and what I mean by that is the relationship that my subject has with objects within close proximity and also the wider landscape. If there are multiple subjects, then I'll try to consider how they complement the main subject and whether I should include or exclude them in the frame. Quite often it's what you exclude that can make an image. So let's take a look at a few photos and I'll discuss why I think the images worked or didn't work. So let's get onto a successful image to start with before we get onto the not so successful ones. So this particular shot was shot in the Peak District, and I don't think it really follows any particular compositional rules. What I try to do is tell a story in this image, and you'll know if you watch the channel a lot that I quite like the tight close-in landscapes as much as I do the wider scenes, and I'm always on the lookout for little vignettes like this. And this picture here, this mountain stream and this silver birch tree, and basically the weather, and it was sleeting heavily, and I just used a slow enough shutter speed to be able to show a little bit of motion in the sleet as it was coming down, and also a little bit of motion in this mountain stream. And the story is about the conditions really as much as the actual shot itself. Okay, on to a couple of not so successful ones. And what I was going for here was something a little bit different, not really following any rules, but the problem with this image is it doesn't really have any clear subject other than the stone wall. The stone wall kind of leads you towards something. It gives you that sense that you want to be drawn towards something, and this dark patch of pine trees doesn't really give a strong enough subject, and it's kind of in conflict, if you like, with this snowy mountaintop. The two kind of don't sit particularly well together. So yeah, no clear subject, you don't really know what you're meant to look at. Let's move on to the next one, which was shot literally about 10 minutes later, and another image that could have worked, but there was a few issues with it. First issue was the sky. I included the sky in this shot, and the sky is very white, a lot of snow clouds around, and yeah, it's very, very bland compared to the rest of the image, and the eye, I feel, gets drawn straight up there, straight away, and it doesn't have a chance to explore the rest of the scene. And also this holly bush on the left hand side. So we've got a very clear, strong subject here in this old tree, but I find the eye is drawn straight out to this holly bush, which is very dark on the left hand side of the frame, and it's kind of half in the frame, half out. But overall, it just didn't work. My next image is this lovely shot which I absolutely love in the Lake District. Just love the reflections, beautifully still morning, lovely light, absolutely wonderful. Now, at first glance, it might look like I followed some of the rules of composition here, but I actually didn't. I decided not to put my kind of central line, if you like, where the land meets the water. Typically with a reflection, if you follow the rules, they say stick it right in the middle of the frame. Well, I decided to not do that. I decided to give more space to the top half of the frame than the bottom. So it's just below that central line. And again, perhaps if you were following the rule of thirds, you might position this house on the third line. I decided to offset that slightly as well, but I actually think it works. This is a good image to show relationships like what I was mentioning before. We've got 3 separate rocks, and I wanted to make sure I got the relationship between those 3 rocks nicely spaced and allowed the eye to be sort of drawn through the scene. So obviously we start in the bottom right hand corner. We've got this diagonal line which points towards the next set of rocks, and then that diagonally points towards the rocks furthest in the background. Now, I would have actually given this a little bit more breathing space. However, there was some rocks to the left which I didn't want to include because that kind of dragged the eye out of the frame, and the very, very blue sky that we've got as well, I think would have detracted from the image. So I decided on a tighter framing than perhaps I would have liked. But I also paid special attention to make sure that there was plenty of heather all the way around these rocks, so they're kind of situated on their own and they didn't merge together. So here's an image that I shot in Snowdonia, and this perhaps demonstrates how shooting the wider scene can then lead you to actually find a composition within a composition. So this first one, I took a wide image and reviewed it on the back of my camera, and this is something I do quite a lot, and it helps me to fine-tune my composition. I find it's a lot easier to see an image in 2D than it is with your own eyes. So sometimes what I'll do is take a wider shot and then look at that image, and I'll zoom in on the back of the screen and I'll move my composition around, and then sometimes I find an image within an image which leads me then to change how I frame the image. So you'll see here that I was quite low down and the sky didn't really work with the rest of the composition, I felt. But then when I looked on the back of my screen, I noticed this little copse of trees which was different to the pine trees behind it. So what I did was climb the hillside a little bit more, which gives me a bit of a more of a overhead perspective, and I was able to come up with a different framing that I think works much, much better. So here's that framing, and yeah, it's just a case of getting a bit higher up and really focusing in on the straight verticals of these trees, and then the copse of trees in the foreground and the mountain beyond it. So this image here, but this is about 2 subjects really and their relationship together. So we've got the water which flows through the scene and these mossy rocks, and it's just about balancing these 2 out in terms of raising the camera up so we can get that pathway to work and getting balance and harmony within the image. And it is all about the relationships between the water and the rocks, just 2 subjects really. So here's another image that I find successful, and this is an image of 2 beech trees. Now typically again when we mention the rules we perhaps think in 3s. I decided to discard that. What I was thinking about was these branches here matching each other, really like that, and the simplicity in the image. And the simplicity comes from trying to separate the tree trunks. The splash of light that I got in the background was just a lucky moment that you sometimes get. But yeah, paying special attention to my position left and right was critical for this image, making sure none of these main trunks overlapped each other. Obviously the ones in the background do, but it was all about that separation, and yeah, just love the way these branches look almost identical on 2 separate trees. So next up we've got a composition that really didn't work. When I look at this image, although the colours are beautiful and it's a fantastic section of woodland, had some wonderful misty conditions too, I don't really know what I'm meant to look at. It's just a lot of colour, which, you know, can work, but I feel for this instance, yeah, I just don't know what to look at. And the last image I want to take a look at is this one which I shot not too long ago actually, and I really wanted to get the contrasting colours between the dark water and the beautiful green lily pad, and kind of put it into a position where it was next to this floating leaf. Different colours, I think works really well. But I also like that when you look deeper into this image, there's a pond skater sitting on the lily pad, and that's what makes the image to me, just that little extra dimension that you don't necessarily notice straight away. Again, it's a square crop, but haven't put the lily pads right in the centre like perhaps you would. Nothing sits in any particular way. I just like the scene, and yeah, I think this image works. So these images all have one thing in common: they didn't conform to any standard rules of photography composition, and I think it's fair to say that the ones I deemed successes, from this selection anyway, would have probably came out worse had I opted for a more traditional approach. So before we head back to the hill to hopefully capture an epic sunset, I just want to quickly tell you about my brand new workshop that I've just added to my website. It's a one-day tour in waterfall country for up to 6 people, and it's set to be an amazing day. So if you fancy joining me to capture some stunning waterfall images, then please be sure to check out my website. The link for that is down below. Anyway, please join me back at the hillside, and fingers crossed we get some amazing light. Wow, it's absolutely stunning up here, but I feel I might have to work quite quickly because there's a bank of fog out to the west and I'm concerned that it might block my light. So I've got an idea for a composition straight away that I'm going to work on, and then we'll see what happens. I'm going to get the tripod set up. I just want to get a shot as quickly as I possibly can, just in case I lose the light. There's a fair amount of cloud out on the horizon, and I'm just worried if the sun dips behind that, I'm going to lose the beautiful light on here. So I just want to get one in the bag to start with, and then I can experiment and work on this area a bit more. Light is sublime right now. So yes, piecing these rocks together, I've got a few different sort of triangular shapes, one with a split in it, heather surrounding it all, and then the view down the valley into the harbour there. It looks spectacular. The light's just hitting the underside of these clouds now, just adding a little bit of an orange hue to an otherwise very blue background. Now, one thing I've had to be particular about is the rocks here protruding above the river as it runs out to sea. What I found is if I got too low with my camera, it would push those rocks up and cut the flow of water off, and I didn't really like that. So I've just positioned the camera so the rocks are just below that water line, and I'm not worrying about any kind of rules in this shot. Like we mentioned earlier, it's really about the scene itself and trying to make the best of it as opposed to adhering to any particular rules. Right, let's grab this image now. Focus about 1/3 of the way into the scene. So I knew I'd lose the light very, very quickly, so I was really keen to take that shot as quickly as possible. As soon as I took that one, I ran up here and grabbed a couple of handheld ones looking back towards the sunset, and another one down here on this outcrop just below us. It'll be interesting to see what they're like. I'll put them up as well. Now, whilst we're talking about composition, I think it's really important to put your own stamp on your images, and that's something I'm really trying to work on. It's all very well and good sticking to the rules of composition, but what tends to happen is you end up with a very generic looking set of images, especially if you apply that to all of your work. I think sometimes, for me anyway, if I'm experimenting with different compositions and trying to work away from the rules of photography, I end up coming back with something that's more personal to me. That's how it feels anyway. So whilst composition is super important, there's a lot of other camera settings and techniques that can help us take great photos. And in the video up here, I discuss some of those techniques as well, worth checking out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more weekly content like this, why not consider subscribing? Until next week, take care, and I'll see you all very soon.